Hey there, Unity. This is Tim, the author. I want to apologize again for the delay in getting part 3 out to you guys. We appreciate your patience. Big shout out of congratulations to Mr. Alex Van Beast, the winner of the fan art contest. His submission provided the thumbnail for this part of the story. Stay tuned after the story is done to check out all the other submissions that were sent to me during the contest. One thing you'll notice right away is that the primary narrator has been switched up for this part of the story. Unfortunately, Mr. Scarecrow could no longer continue due to personal reasons, but we all want to thank him so much for his masterful job in narrating parts 1 and 2. Parts 3 through 5 from this point on will be narrated by the brilliant Dr.Creepen Van Pasta, and we're so thrilled to have him. Welcome aboard, mate. Without any further ado, please enjoy.
Hammond, Louisiana, August 10th, 2014. Officer Nathaniel Dixon rapped his knuckles against the counter, signaling to the bartender he was ready for another scotch. He hated it when the bar was overcrowded. It made him feel trapped, like he was inside a crippled submarine lying motionless at the bottom of the ocean. And the entire crew had crammed themselves into the only room that wasn't flooded, irritably bumping elbows as they waited somberly for the air to run out. In the few short seconds it took the bartender to refill Dixon's glass, 3 other people had called out to him for service. Dixon couldn't recall a time when the bar had ever been reduced to standing room only, but, to be fair, this wasn't an ordinary Sunday night. He sullenly glanced back up at the flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, where the news anchor was recapping the story again about the controversial shooting that had happened in Ferguson the day before. Dozens of people had flocked to their local bars for some liquid nourishment to alleviate the shock of the incident, and talk louder than was necessary about the decline of the country, the savagery of police, or the inexcusable behavior of America's inner-city youth. It varied from person to person. Dixon had decided to forego going to his usual watering hole with his brothers in blue, and instead visit another local bar, where he was less likely to be recognized. It wasn't an ideal time to be a cop right now, and if he was going to get any action that evening, it was best for him to appear like just another barfly. The man sitting on the stool to his left sucked down the rest of his beer, his teeth clinking loudly against the glass neck of the bottle, and stood up to leave. It took less than 5 seconds for a woman to claim the stool as her own, wiping away the small spots of beer on the counter with the sleeve of her leather jacket. She carried herself in a way that Dixon appreciated. She'd grabbed the bar stool as if it were a life jacket in shark-infested waters, which showed confidence and daring. And she seemed more at home surrounded by drunken belligerents than he ever did with other cops in uniform. She had unkempt, dark hair, which badly needed the attention of a brush. But the fact that she didn't look like she was trying to impress anyone made him all the more enamored with her. The woman slammed her palms down on the counter to get the bartender to notice her.
Hey, booze jockey. Tits take priority. 2 shots of Beam and a Stella.
She shrugged off her leather jacket and let it fall behind her onto the grimy floor, revealing a slim, yet pleasantly robust figure underneath a sleeveless black turtleneck, which reminded Dixon of Amazon warriors. He casually leaned back off his own stool and retrieved the leather coat from the ground.
Coat's off and on the floor. You're off to a promising start.
The woman glanced at him through her curtain of dark bangs.
Oh, aren't you clever?
She took the jacket back from him and tossed it onto the ground on the far side of her stool, out of his reach, before leaning her elbows on the table and rubbing at her eyes with her wrists.
I get the feeling your place isn't tidy enough for company right now. Fortunately, though, mine is.
The woman let out a sound through her mouth, somewhere between a grunt and a sigh, and bowed her head, wincing like she was fighting a migraine.
Oh my god. Your voice is like a cheese grater against a chalkboard. Please stop talking.
Dixon chuckled as the bartender returned and set 2 shot glasses and a chilled mug of beer in front of the woman.
Put hers on my tab, please.
The woman snapped at the bartender before he could walk away.
If you let him pay for my drinks, I'm going to climb over this fucking counter and force feed you your stupid over-large belt buckle.
The bartender smirked and raised his palms in a cautious, "I'm staying out of this" expression, and strolled back to the opposite end of the counter. Grabbing the shot glasses in either hand, she threw back each with the same swallow, before raising the large, cool mug to her head to press it against her temple.
Okay, I'm sorry for the one-liners. I don't seem to be in the mood for charm. How about empathy? I'm Nathan.
He held out his hand, but the woman didn't look at him, instead lowering the mug from her forehead to take a long, slow sip before setting it down.
And I'm not interested.
Oh, come on. That can't be the most unpleasant guy you've ever encountered.
More like the most unpleasant guy who had an empty stool next to him.
She pulled a pack of crumpled smokes from her pocket and lit one up without hesitating.
I wish I could enjoy one of those with you, but it would get us both thrown out seeing as it's illegal to smoke in here.
The woman tossed her head back and exhaled a long web of grey, smoky tendrils towards the ceiling.
Oh, I'm not actually smoking. Though I see why you're confused. I'm actually going down on Clooney. This is a penis voodoo doll.
Dixon chuckled again and scooted forward on his stool to sit closer to her.
Lucky for him, I'd say. But getting tossed out on your ass won't do him any favors. He's not hurting for action anyway.
The woman gave him a bitter glare and blew smoke into his face.
You're a fucking cop, aren't you?
Dixon recoiled a bit in shock, taken aback by the certainty behind her statement.
I knew it. You have this cocky, authoritative manner to how you speak. It's easy to recognize when you're around cops as often as I am.
And what line of work are you in that has you around cops regularly?
I bake donuts.
Dixon felt the mild irritation he'd been suppressing start to grow into the beginnings of anger. He pulled out his wallet and flashed his badge under the counter, so only she could see it.
Well done, young lady. You caught me without my mask on. Now put it out before I knock it down your throat.
The woman smirked and let out one last cloudy breath before dropping the cigarette into his scotch glass.
Whatever you say, Officer Dickless.
Dixon angrily shoved his wallet back into his pocket, but while his hand was concealed from her within his jacket, he carefully unfastened the strap on his holster and wrapped his fingers around the handle of his gun. When he spoke again, his voice was calm yet cold, each word delivered like a professor in a lecture hall.
I've been nothing but courteous to you, and you've responded with nothing but a smug attitude and a barrage of personal insults. And I'd like to think it's not too late to make amends. Whatever trials you've been through, I didn't create them, and a beautiful woman like yourself should recognize an opportunity such as this to temporarily escape your troubles and allow yourself a night of unrepressed pleasure.
The woman drained her beer glass and slammed it down on the counter, loud enough to turn the heads of the people in the immediate area.
Okay, listen up, asshat. First of all, stop talking like a fucking Harvard graduate. Some of us didn't finish college. Secondly, there's nothing you or anyone else can do to me in bed that will make me forget this is the anniversary of my mother's death. And maybe I want to mourn that privately instead of crying into a man's chest. Thirdly, even if I wanted to fuck, you're not a prize or an opportunity, and I'd rather eat a soggy BLT with a pine cone shoved up my cleft than let you touch me. And finally, don't ever call me fucking beautiful again, or I'll beat you to death with your own bar stool.
Dixon pulled the gun fully from its holster, but kept it hidden under his jacket.
Threatening the life of a police officer is a criminal offense. I could arrest you right now.
She leaned forward, her face inches from his, and taunted him in a silky, seductive tone, her voice barely above a whisper.
Go right ahead. I dare you. Pull out the cuffs right here and throw me to the ground. I'll bet half the people in here are looking for an excuse to execute a cop tonight.
Dixon smirked. Her choosing to lean forward so close to him would work to his advantage. He would jab the gun into her ribs, and the two of them would subtly walk out of the bar, across the parking lot and into his car, where he had duct tape and chloroform waiting in a bag in his trunk. All he had to do was point the gun, and she was his hostage. But he couldn't resist having the last word, and before he could stop himself, he opened his mouth for a final parting shot.
I enjoy it when you talk to me like that. Did your mother teach you that? I'll bet she had a better mouth on her than you do. Did she die choking on a cock?
With an explosion of glass, the woman smashed her mug against the right side of his face as hard as she could. Dixon dropped his gun and flew sideways off his stool, his vision disappearing behind a curtain of murky red fluid. With the shattered mug still in her hand, she delivered 3 more blows to the side of his face as he lay on the floor. Blood flowing freely from his right eye, the jagged glass cutting open several more gashes across his cheek as she continued to strike him. Overwhelmed by the vicious onslaught, Dixon blacked out. He awoke 12 hours later in the hospital, the right side of his face heavily bandaged. He had needed over 60 stitches to close the multiple wounds on the side of his face. The worst of it was his eye, where several small fragments of glass had to be removed from the open cut, just to the right of his pupil. The doctors told him it was unlikely he'd be able to see from that eye ever again, and even if he could, his vision would be cloudy and weak at best. The woman who had assaulted him had been detained by the bouncers, but had managed to slip away long before the ambulance had arrived, crossing the state line into Mississippi before a warrant was even issued for her arrest. Using fingerprint analysis of the shot glasses that she'd handled, the investigators discovered her name already in the system: Meredith Kaplan, also known as Murray. Present day. The sharp stabbing sensation inside her mouth was what she noticed first when she regained consciousness. Feeling around with her tongue, she tasted blood lining her teeth and gums like fresh paint. A wave of furious pain reverberated down her jaw when her tongue found the chipped tooth throbbing like an exposed nerve amongst her back molars. She tried to raise her hand to her face, but her wrist refused to close the distance. The reality beyond the pain in her mouth started to set in, and she realized she was lying on her side upon a cold metal surface, her hands behind her back, and her head buzzing, as though her internal wiring had been fried. Opening her eyes just a crack to examine her surroundings, she repositioned her knees underneath her and slowly knelt up.
Ugh. I'm fucking handcuffed, aren't I?
She spoke groggily, more to herself than anyone else. Her sweaty hair clung to her face, and her left arm was prickly and numb from resting upon it for so long. Along her temple she could feel the soft pressure of a fresh bandage. She spat downwards between her knees and looked around. She was in the bed of a truck that wasn't hers, in the middle of a patch of woods she didn't recognize in the dead of night. Where the hell was she? Why was she handcuffed? Suddenly a flood of memories came raining down upon her, as though she was trapped in the bottom half of an hourglass. The Creeper, Janine and Holly, Travis's last words, the truck being chased by monsters, Barkley going over the side, Dixon's eyes as he struck her. Murray immediately wrenched at the cuffs as hard as she could and searched around frantically for her shotgun, Jinx, which was nowhere to be found. Aside from several spent shotgun shells, all that shared the bed of the truck with her was a folded jacket that had been placed under her head as a makeshift pillow, and a large pool of blood, still fresh enough to glint against the moonlight. Murray made a shaky attempt to stand, but immediately fell back upon her knees, her head still aching from however many blows Dixon had graced her with. From around the front of the truck came the frantic rushing of footsteps, and Janine was suddenly beside her, her voice shaking as though the ground was about to suddenly give way beneath them.
Murray! Holy shit, thank God you're alive.
Murray gritted her teeth hard, sending another surge of pain discharging across her jawline. With an animalistic growl, her voice escaped from the bleeding mouth.
Where is he?
Janine lowered the tailgate and climbed in next to her.
Who? Dixon? He's just up the path with Keller.
Grab Holly. We're getting out of here. Where's my gun?
Murray made a second attempt to stand, but without her arms to steady her, she staggered and nearly fell before Janine caught her.
Whoa, calm down. You have to take it easy, Murray. Holly says you possibly have a concussion. Sit back down a minute, okay?
We've got to leave before he gets back. Go find my gun.
Murray bent over and coughed hard as her vision swam, and she vomited a splash of bourbon and blood down onto her boots. Holly was suddenly there in the truck bed beside them. She grabbed Murray by the shoulders and forced her to sit down on the truck's fender. She pulled a small pen light from her pocket and shone the beam into Murray's eyes, causing her to wince as the small flashlight blinded her with the force of a nuke blast.
Okay, Harpo, I'm sitting down, alright? Could you get the light out of my face, please? God, where are we? How long was I out?
Janine carefully helped Murray sip from a bottle of water as Holly started to examine the cut under her dark bangs with the help of a pen light.
An hour or so, maybe 90 minutes. Holy shit, Murray, we thought you got shot. We were freaking out, but Keller wouldn't stop the truck until it literally died. Apparently, we damaged the axle during the chase and it cracked like a rice cake. You should have seen Holly try to tear Dixon a new one when he wouldn't let her up here to examine you.
Don't go taking any punches from me, kid.
Murray sighed heavily, unsure as to whether or not the deaf girl was paying attention to what they were saying. She winced again as Holly changed the bandage of her temple and cleaned her cutout with something from the first aid kit. Holly made a series of signs with her hands to Janine.
Holly says you need stitches.
What I need is to get out of these cuffs and find my gun.
Dixon has your shotgun. Is it true what he's saying, Murray? Did you really attack him with a beer mug?
Murray let out a dismal chuckle.
One of the proudest moments of my life. I may have killed him if the bouncer hadn't grabbed me.
Janine helped her take another swallow of water.
Dixon says we're in Louisiana now, and you're under arrest. But Keller's less concerned with that than he is getting us out of these woods alive. He eventually let Holly check you out just to make sure that you were still breathing. And then he and Dixon went out to scout the road with flashlights. They're not sure where we are exactly.
Where's the other guy? The redneck with that bad leg?
Around the front of the truck on the ground, passed out. He's in bad shape. His stitches are tore open and his leg felt like it was on fire. Holly says the wound is infected.
Janine paused a moment and took a quick look around before lowering her voice.
Did you see what happened to the other cop? Barkley, I think, right? Dixon said he fell.
Murray grunted.
I had my head turned, but I'm willing to bet my left tit Dixon shot him and tossed him over.
Janine and Holly exchanged a look.
Keller and Dixon had a big fight after the truck stopped. I thought for a second they were gonna kill each other.
Murray took several deep breaths as she gazed around the truck into the inky darkness of the woods surrounding them. As much as she hated to admit it to herself, she was completely defenseless and at the mercy of a psychopath. If not for the girls, she would have struck out on her own, handcuffed or not, to try her luck against giant wolves and the lurking creepers. But she couldn't leave them there or try to protect them out in the open, not in her current condition. She looked the two of them in the eye, both of them looking to her for answers. The wounded criminal, instead of either of the male cops. They trusted her, even though they barely knew her, and Murray loved them for it. She took another long, deep breath and began to speak.
Listen, girls, I broke the law. I assaulted him and deserved the cuffs, and if it were any other cop in any other situation, I would go quietly. But this guy, Dixon, is insane. After the incident with him in the bar, I had my friend Sheriff August look into him. When he was 19, he killed 2 guys with a hatchet who broke into his house. He was never charged as it was ruled as self-defense, but 4 women have come forward with allegations of assault against him, and he's killed 3 unarmed men since they gave him a badge. It always gets swept under the rug like it's just another day's work down south.
Janine nervously bit her lip while Holly stared closely at Murray's face with great concern, reading her lips carefully as every new word was formed.
I'm not trying to frighten you. I just need you to understand the type of danger we're in. I can't vouch for the other cop, but if we get into a situation where it's just us and Dixon, you may have to defend yourselves. Do you still have the knife and the taser I gave you back at camp?
The girls nodded.
He searched you, but not us.
Good. For now, we have to stick together and pray those fucking wolves don't find us again. But if I can get my hands free and take him out, we need to be ready to run.
Murray, what were those giant wolf things?
For the first time since she had awoken, Murray felt the chill of vulnerability coursing through her veins. She shook her head.
I really don't know, Janine. Nothing that I've ever seen or heard of. Some kind of insane mutant canine crossbreeds or some freak genetic experiment gone clusterfuck. Frankly, I don't really care what they are as long as we don't see them again.
Holly nodded with a distant look in her eye. Janine put on a brave face and a half-hearted grin, but Murray could tell she was terrified and barely able to contain it.
Could you gals help me down off this truck? I need to salvage what's left of this pretty face if I ever want my porn star career to take off.
Janine laughed, and the two of them each took Murray by an arm and helped her step down onto the rough dirt road. Holly shone her penlight straight ahead as they made their way around the front of the truck to find Jason passed out under the front bumper.
He was so frantic when the truck died that he actually tried to run off on his own to get away from those things. When he collapsed, he crawled under the truck like a scared cat, and Dixon literally had to punch him to knock him out to stop his wailing.
Yeah, I notice he's a fan of negotiating with his fists.
Murray replied sarcastically, as her tooth and temple continued to throb painfully.
Holly tried to bandage his leg again, but she says without a hospital, there's not much we can do for him. He needs antibiotics.
And I need a hot shower and a cold beer. Preferably at the same time.
The three women sat down together beside the front of the truck, Holly fussing again at Murray's bandage like a medically licensed mother hen. She made a hand gesture to Janine and tilted her head at Murray.
What did she say?
Janine sighed and wiped the start of a tear from her eye.
We're so sorry about your brother.
Murray felt as though someone had fired a cannonball into her gut. Up until that moment, she'd been able to distance herself from the truth about Travis. But as Janine reluctantly, yet sincerely, expressed their condolences, the pain and grief overwhelmed her with the force of an avalanche, and she couldn't overpower the tears. She shook her head in exasperation.
He always had to be the fucking hero, I once asked him when drunk off my ass how he wanted to go. You know what that stupid brute said? Saving the life of a stranger. I gave him so much shit for that.
Murray's voice cracked, and she started weeping uncontrollably. Janine wrapped her arms around her and gave Murray her best attempt at a comforting hug. Holly pulled a crumpled tissue from her pocket and wiped the tears as best she could off Murray's face in the dark. Murray sniffed.
Thanks, Harpo.
Several dozen feet away, hidden amongst the shadows cast by the moon, a pair of pale eyes stared at the three women intently, watching every intake of breath, daring them to meet their gaze. After another 5 minutes, Murray noticed two beams of light coming down the road at a brisk walk. Raising herself awkwardly to her feet, she walked forward a few steps, standing in plain sight within the range of the flashlights. Janine and Holly followed to stand on either side of her.
Dixon, we need to talk.
The firm footfalls of the two cops suddenly became a nervous jog, and the two men came forward, shining their lights directly into Murray's face. Both men had weapons drawn, but while Keller's was pointed at the ground, Murray saw with disgust that Dixon had her shotgun, Jinx, aimed directly at her face. She snarled at the girls in rage as though he had caught them trying to break open their cuffs.
Step away from the prisoner now. I told you not to approach her.
To Murray's amazement, both girls placed themselves between her and the shotgun.
Please! She saved our lives. She's hurt and unarmed.
Dixon took a furious step forward. Jinx now pointed at the spot between Janine's breasts, his dead eye pulsing in rage like a demon heartbeat.
Stand down before I give you a taste of what she got.
No, don't touch them. Girls, get out of the way.
Keller holstered his gun and quickly moved forward, grabbing both girls by the arm and pulling them out of the line of fire.
For Christ's sake, Nate, they're kids. Lower the gun.
Dixon made to respond to his fellow officer, but Murray interrupted, staring unflinching past his weapon and directly into his scarred face.
Damn it, Dixon, leave them out of this. Listen to me. I destroyed your eye and you have beef. I understand that, but there's more going on here than just you and me. We need to get out of the woods before those wolf things find us. You want me to pay? I accept that, but I want them out of danger. Once we all make it back, I'll come quietly. I promise you. But keeping me in cuffs won't help any of us. You need my help. Your hatred of me is going to get us all killed.
A slow, grotesque smile began to form on Dixon's face, his teeth the color of a stick of butter that had been dropped in the dust. He chuckled as he took a step closer to her, and she fought not to gag against the smell of cigarillos on his breath. He playfully poked at her stomach with the shotgun, the way a child pokes at a bird that had just flown into a window.
Let me see if I got this right. I should free the dangerous, unstable suspect who half-blinded me because I, according to her, need her help? Because she feels she needs to protect me?
Murray glared hard at him as she continued to stare back into his soulless, damaged eye.
Protect the girls, yes. I don't really give a shit about the rest of you.
Dixon spat at her feet and grabbed her throat and pulled her close, causing a fresh wave of pain to erupt from her jawline. Janine gasped and Keller shouted at him.
God damn it, Nate. If you kill her, I'll fucking drop you myself.
Dixon spoke directly to Murray, ignoring the rest of the group.
I'm not gonna kill you, Kaplan. But there's something you need to understand. You don't get to make demands. You don't get to speak at all. It's not your job to protect anyone. I'm the man with the gun. I'm the one who's in charge. And I'll be the one who protects who I feel deserves protection.
For fuck's sake, Dixon, we don't have time for this. You know I'm right. You've got 2 unarmed civilians, a wounded man, and the chick used to staying alive in dangerous situations handcuffed. How the fuck are only 2 guns going to get us all out of here?
Dixon threw a punch into Murray's gut, and she fell to her knees so hard, her face ricocheted off the dirt.
Stop it!
Keller forced himself between Murray and Dixon.
God damn it, Nate, that's enough!
Dixon ignored Keller and leaned down on one knee so Murray could better hear him.
That's for my eye, you motherless cunt. How about we agree on this? From here on out, your every breath belongs to me. You fall in line or else I make sure your friends are left here to die in agonizing pain.
Murray spat and fought to catch her breath as Janine and Holly rushed to her side.
Fuck you, you psychopath!
As Keller and the girls helped to slowly raise Murray back to her feet, she screamed at Dixon through her bleeding lips.
You coward son of a bitch! My brother died out here to protect us. It'll all be for nothing!
From behind them, Murray heard Jason Ford cry out in shock and fear, likely awoken by all the arguing. He desperately tried to raise himself to stand on his good leg while supporting his weight on the truck's grill.
Oh, fuck! Why the fuck are we just sitting here? We can't be here! Them mad wolf fucks will find us!
As if on cue, there was a distant howling of a lone wolf that made them all choke on their breath and freeze where they stood. After about 5 seconds, several other howls echoed the first.
He's right. We need to go. We found a ranger station about a half-mile further up on the road. It's all boarded up, but if we could break in, there may be a radio inside.
Henry, you help the redneck walk. Kaplan walks up front with me. The 2 of you ladies shut up and don't fall behind.
Dixon grabbed Murray's shoulder roughly and forced her to walk in front of him down the path, pressing Jinx's twin barrels directly into her back. Murray stumbled every few feet as the nausea from the pain in her head impaired her balance. Dixon cupped her ass with his free hand as they marched. The wolves continued howling at their backs as the group left the truck behind, to be swallowed by the shadows. None of them aware of the creature that had been silently observing them from underneath the broken axle. Its pale, unblinking eyes, cold, watchful, and merciless. The ranger station Keller had been referring to turned out to be little more than a fire lookout tower with a small wooden brick cabin at its base and a little larger than a 2-car garage. It sat alone in a small clearing looking like a worthless antique left abandoned after an estate sale, and judging by the thick layer of leaves covering the wooden front steps and the cobwebs criss-crossing between the outside of the window panes, Murray guessed the building had been left for the forest to reclaim long ago. She stopped her reluctant march forward and turned to look back at Keller, completely ignoring Dixon.
Oh, hell no. Hold up. You can't be serious. This place doesn't look like it could survive a power wash. There's no way we'll be safe here.
Dixon kicked the back of Murray's leg and made her crumple awkwardly to her knees.
Will you shut your fucking mouth or I'll gag you with the redneck sock?
Take off these cuffs and I'll gag you with your good eye.
Dixon roughly grabbed a clump of Murray's hair in an angry fist and twisted her head back before Keller grabbed Dixon and shoved him off her.
That's enough! Damn it, Nate, keep your hands off of her.
Dixon grabbed Keller by the collar and furiously yanked him forward so the two men were nose to nose.
Listen here, you sack of wet shit. If you ever put your hands on me again, I'll hit you so hard your eardrums will rupture.
Fine. As long as you're not hitting her.
Keller shook Dixon off and helped Murray back to her feet.
I'm sorry. I know it's not much, but it's gonna have to do. There's nothing else except for open forest for miles around.
For how long will it have to do? Please tell me your people know where you are at least. Did you get a message out in the truck radio? How long until the cavalry arrives?
Neither Keller or Dixon replied, as they all approached the cabin and Dixon climbed the wooden steps. Wrenching open the storm door, he fought against the rusty knob of the inner door before slamming his shoulder into the wood. It didn't budge. Jason let out an agonized groan from the back of the group.
Hey man, answer the lady. Help is coming, right?
But you three couldn't have been out here alone. There must have been cops in the area, right? And they'll send helicopters to look for you when you don't check in. Right?
Dixon slammed his bulk into the door with a loud wooden creak, but the door refused to give. Keller tried his luck, prying open one of the windows, neither of them responding to the desperate questions. Murray slowly sank back down to her knees as the full realization of their situation finally began to make sense.
So that's why 3 Louisiana state cops were roaming through the backwoods of Mississippi. You were off the reservation, weren't you? Probably off duty and looking into that redneck wolf attack we stumbled across? No one even knows you're out here, do they?
Fucking hell! Worthless dog shit pigs! I need a fucking hospital, man! We seriously can't be lost out here all on our own. Those fucking wolves will be on us any minute.
Dixon spun around in anger and fired jinks into the air to silence them.
The next person who speaks is getting shot in the fucking throat.
As the echo of the shotgun blast started to fade into silence, another sound abruptly emerged to take its place. From about 100 yards away in the trees behind them, the group heard a crunching of undergrowth and a low, deep growl of something enormous moving steadily closer. Everyone began rapidly talking at once.
Keller, get these cuffs off me and give me a gun!
Why the fuck would you fire a gun and signal them like that, you fucking brain-dead shit-eating jackass?
Oh my god, Murray, we need to get out of here. We have to run!
Everyone, get behind me.
Holly suddenly started clapping her hands loud and fast to get everyone's attention. And once all eyes were on her, she began signing so quickly to Murray. Her hands seemed to be just a blur of motion. Keller shone his flashlight on her to better understand what she was trying to communicate, and her shadow stretched out behind her to the tree line, as if it were a welcoming path laid out for the wolf creatures to follow.
What's she saying, Janine?
Janine's terrified eyes followed Holly's hands, as if she were instructing her as to how to disable a bomb with only seconds remaining on the clock. Holly furiously pointed upwards at the fire tower, as if to emphasize her point to her friend. Janine's eyes went wide with hope as she suddenly understood.
She says that she can climb up onto that roof and then climb down the fire tower and into the cabin from above.
Dixon snarled.
Bullshit. I'm blowing the door.
No, you can't blow the door, Nate. We need to be able to lock it behind us.
Holly had already kicked off her shoes and was clawing her way up the side of the cabin like a mountain climber, her fingers and toes finding edges and cracks in between the crumbling bricks.
Don't just stand there, help her!
Janine and Keller ran forward and boosted Holly up further by cupping their hands under her feet. Holly disappeared over the top of the roof, and Murray faintly made out her silhouette in the dark, sprinting to the tower. From the forest, the sound of heavy footfalls and deep breathing continued to intensify. And Murray was reminded of the sound dogs made when they were furiously tearing up the dirt underneath the fence, trying to get at the invading chipmunk that was just out of reach.
She's got 30 seconds and then I'm blowing open the door.
Janine helped Jason stagger over to the door, Murray following behind them, her hands still locked behind her like caged animals. Keller and Dixon faced the woods, their weapons up and ready to take aim at anything that emerged from the shadows in between the trees. Jason pounded at the door in frustration.
Come on, goddammit! Come on!
Janine clutched at Murray's jacket, her eyes darting back and forth between the forest and the door, frantically muttering under her breath.
Please, Holly! Please, hurry, Holly, please!
Murray fought relentlessly against the cuffs, causing the tendons in her wrists to throb painfully in protest. She desperately strained her ears for any sign of Holly on the other side of the door. She was hoping to shove Janine inside and slam the door behind them, trapping the others outside, if Holly moved quickly enough. She felt a cold trickle of sweat run down her back the moment she realized she might not live that long, as several thundering wolf howls seemed to erupt from the trees around them like water exploding through a dam.
Fuck this.
Dixon spat in panic and rage as he shoved past the others and pointed Jinx at the door handle.
Wait, don't shoot! She could be on the other side of the door.
Dixon slammed his fist hard 3 times against the thick wood.
If you're there, you better fucking back away.
She's deaf.
Right as Dixon put his finger on the trigger of the gun, the door was wrenched open with a loud creak. And Holly stood before them in the dark, looking winded and terrified. Dixon shoved past her so hard, Holly fell backwards and landed hard on the dusty wooden floor. Murray slammed her body into Janine's back to propel them both inside. With Jason and Keller so close behind her, She felt their breath on the back of her neck. Keller slammed the door behind them, plunging them into almost total darkness. Dixon's flashlight beam illuminated the room, and he immediately started shouting orders like a drill sergeant.
Henry, secure that fucking door. You, mime, show me where you got in. The rest of you, lights, weapons, and radio. In that order.
Keller had already fastened the deadbolt back on the door and was frantically shoving the roll-top desk across the room to barricade the entrance so haphazardly that he was gouging lines in the floorboards. Jason lay on the ground in tears, cursing incoherently, and clutching his leg as blood pooled beneath him, staining the musty bearskin rug. Janine had gone to help Holly up, but was shaking so badly she had actually collapsed on the ground right beside her and was holding her tightly in her arms like a child clutches a stuffed bear when she's lost in the supermarket. Murray was awkwardly trying to prop herself up, using the ancient threadbare couch, when Dixon grabbed her roughly around the back of her neck and practically dragged her to the corner, where he threw her face down on the ground and planted a knee on her back. He unfastened one of her cuffs and wrenched her back upwards and around, so she was sitting in a position facing the door. She badly wanted to strike out and fight back against her captor, but in such a small space she was afraid of her shotgun going off and accidentally hitting one of the girls. Dixon fed the handcuffs around the pipe of a cast iron stove that was bolted to the wall, and reattached the cold steel to free Murray's wrist. Murray snarled at Dixon as he stood back up.
Are you fucking serious? Am I that much of a threat to you?
If I die here tonight, Kaplan, I'm making sure you're coming with me.
Go fuck a cactus with both hands, dickless.
Dixon ignored her and stomped across the room, his footsteps reverberating heavily across the wooden floorboards, and grabbed Holly roughly by the arm, tearing her up and away from Janine.
Hey, I asked where the fuck did you get him from?
Janine leapt to her feet and grabbed Dixon's arm.
Get off of her!
Keller intervened and pried Dixon off the two girls.
All of you, shut up a moment! Listen.
The small group paused a moment as one and froze where they stood, catching their breath, and tried to discern anything from the other side of the cabin walls to indicate a coming assault. Aside from Jason's faint sobbing and cursing, all they could hear was the faint sound of soft wind rustling the leaves. There was no howling, no snarling or pounding footsteps against the dirt. Not even the whisper of heavy breathing on the other side of the door. Janine broke the silence first, her voice trembling as though she knew the ice was about to crack beneath her feet.
What are they doing? Where are they?
They have to be close. There's no way they'd abandon the hunt after cornering us in here.
They haven't abandoned anything. Those fucking things know they have us trapped, but they also know we can hurt them. They're reevaluating their plan of attack. It's time we did the same. Henry, let's find your gun cabinet.
Murray raised herself to her feet as best she could, while still being cuffed to the pipe at about waist level.
Hey, I see the fuse box over in the corner by the bookshelf.
Dixon and Keller made for the back room, while Holly hurried into the kitchenette, where a gas lantern sat upon the table opposite the fridge. She dug through drawers impatiently, until she located a book of matches, while Janine frantically flipped the switches inside the fuse box. Jason Ford climbed gingerly up onto the couch, sweating and sobbing, leaving a smear of blood across the floor in his wake.
Ugh, we're all gonna die tonight, man. I'm never gonna see my ma again, all because of a few fucking dead horses. I can't die trapped in here like this.
Hey, asshole, worrying about dying gets you killed. Focusing on staying alive saves your life.
Over by the fuse box, Janine slapped the wall in bitter fury.
God damn it! I can barely see what I'm doing. Nothing's working!
Holly emerged from the kitchen holding the gas lantern up high, bringing with her a modest and somewhat comforting glow of light. For the first time since they entered the cabin, Murray was able to get a good look at their new surroundings. It was obvious the cabin was only meant to house perhaps 2 men at a time in shifts similar to fire stations. There was a small living area with a desk and sofa next to a small kitchenette. A ladder running up the side of the dividing wall to a ceiling hatch, where Holly had found her way in. To Murray's immediate left was an off-balance bunk bed, and beyond that an entrance to what was probably a microscopically small bathroom. Dixon and Keller had disappeared into what was probably a storeroom with the water heater, and, apparently, the gun cabinet. There were exactly 3 windows Murray could see. One large one by the door, one in the kitchen, and a small one right above her head, and likely at least one other in the bathroom. There was no radio or electronic equipment of any kind she could locate, but there was a calendar hanging on the wall by the ladder with a nude model draped over a tractor, which read May 2008, which didn't give her much hope they would find anything useful. Dixon and Keller returned from the back room, their sleeves and shoulders covered in dust and cobwebs, each carrying an armload of the gun cabinet's contents. Jason looked up from where Holly was examining his leg again.
Hot damn! Please tell me you found guns.
Yeah, the type you find in a discount bin at a redneck yard sale.
Keller and Dixon set the weapons down upon the table next to the gas lamp.
We've got a hunting rifle that was probably new in 1991, a rusty shotgun that will probably misfire, a flare gun with 1 shot, and 2 snub-nosed revolvers that may tickle the wolves if they actually still shoot straight.
Add Kaplan's shotgun to your own sidearms we brought with us, and we're looking at maybe enough firepower to defend a fruit stand.
Dixon spat irritably onto the grimy linoleum floor of the kitchenette.
Henry, best start cleaning out as best you can, and I mean now. We have enough ammo for maybe 1 assault before daybreak if we're lucky. I'll take the sawn off and the hunting rifle. You take the shotgun and I'll give the redneck one of the snub noses.
Hey, hold up, man. I can't do any shooting. I can barely sit up straight.
Well, you better fucking make an attempt or else you're useless to us and we're throwing you outside.
What about the girls, Dixon?
Dixon pointed Jinx at her again, in unhinged frustration.
Shut your fucking dyke mouth, Kaplan.
No, Nate, she's right. It's gonna take more than 3 people to defend this place.
Dixon ran a sweaty hand, coated with dried blood, down his face, and let out a deep breath that stopped just short of a snarl.
Give the mime another snub nose and make sure she knows how to use it.
Holly picked the small gun up from the table and expertly spun the cylinder open and clicked it shut again before flipping Dixon off and mouthing the words, "Fuck you."
What do I do?
Look for bottled water, a first aid kit, and a radio, and keep the hell out of our way.
Dixon picked up the flare gun and crossed the room to the ladder, as Keller began to clean the weapons as best he could with gun oil and steel wool. Jason groaned as Holly went back to examining his leg, and Janine walked over to sit beside Murray. She leaned in close and whispered into her ear as Dixon disappeared up through the ceiling hatch.
I really wish you had killed that guy when you had the chance, or at least blinded him completely.
Not nearly as much as I do. I thought Holly didn't know how to handle a gun.
She technically doesn't, but she does play a lot of paintball and watches loads of action movies.
Murray chuckled and rested her head against the cold, hollow pipe on the cast iron stove.
She probably saved all our lives climbing up onto the roof like that. How did she know she could scale the side of the building?
She climbs rocks too, both outdoors and in the gym.
Okay, shut up. Now I'm starting to hate myself. The only things I ever climb in my free time are bar stools. What's with her ambition? She doesn't drink, goes to med school, makes time for hiking, camping, and climbing. Most chicks her age bar hop and sift through dick pics on Tinder.
Janine paused and glanced over at her friend across the room, who was carefully reapplying Jason's bandage while cleaning the blood off his leg as best she could. Janine's face looked solemn, almost distraught, when she finally turned back to look at Murray.
She has glaucoma, and her treatments haven't been working. She only has a few years left to enjoy life to the fullest before she can't do any of those things anymore.
Murray stared back at Janine with a sick, heartbroken feeling in the pit of her stomach, as though someone had just punctured a hole in their lifeboat as they floated adrift at sea.
Wait, you mean she's deaf and going blind?
Janine nodded slowly.
She's already learned how to read Braille, for when the time comes. I'm terrified for her, but you know what the weird thing is? She doesn't complain about it, and I've never once seen her cry.
Janine wiped at her face with the bottom of Travis's borrowed tank top.
I guess I do enough of that for the both of us.
And I do enough talking for all of us. How did you two even meet?
She was my math tutor in high school. Without her, I would have totally flunked geometry. I was too busy learning how to dance back then to focus on homework. I was ready to go on that TV talent show and become a star. But, you know, since I couldn't also play the violin while dancing and didn't have that chick's perfect leg or an angelic voice, I was overlooked.
Janine shrugged.
It's all right, though. I taught myself sign language and gained a best friend.
Murray watched in somber fascination and respect as Holly wiped the sweat off Jason's brow as he lay upon the couch in tears, holding the revolver awkwardly against his chest, like a video game controller, while Holly's was holstered at the ready in her pocket. She was taking care of a man she hardly knew, in a situation where almost anyone else would only be concerned about saving their own skin. Murray felt a rage building inside of her. There was no way she was going to let these girls die here. She was going to get herself free and get Janine and Holly to safety and freedom. The rest of them had all walked into this mess with at least a small awareness of the danger they would be facing. But these girls had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time and deserved another chance to lead rich, full lives. The world needed more kind and caring people like them in it, and less violent assholes and drunks like the rest of them. Murray shifted her position against the pipe to playfully poke Janine with her elbow.
Don't worry, girl. I'm gonna get us out of here. Just give me some time, and I'll figure something out. I've survived worse than Dixon and overlarge rabid furries.
It was a lie, of course. Murray had never been more in over her head in her life. But the important thing was that, just for a moment, Janine managed to smirk, as though she actually believed it. Murray's eyes wandered the room idly for a few moments, and for the first time noticed something promising. In between the bookshelf and the fire extinguisher was a pair of bolt cutters that were leaning up against the wall. No one seemed to have noticed them yet, and if she could get one of the girls to cut her free, then she could take care of Dixon when he least expected it, and somehow get them the hell out of there. She was about to point them out to Janine, when there came a bright flash of red light from outside that made all of them look up.
Hey, what was that, man? A flashlight? Is someone coming?
It looked like a flare. Nate must have saw something and fired one off the roof.
As if on cue, there came a thundering of footsteps from above, and Dixon hurled the roof hatch open, screaming like a madman. Dixon had climbed up onto the roof to get a better sense of their surroundings. His plan originally had been to climb the fire tower to see if he could spot any signs of civilization or help close by, and fire up a flare, but had almost immediately decided against it. It was nearly pitch black out, and he didn't want to use his flashlight to navigate his way up the crooked steps to the platform above, for fear of alerting whatever ravenous creatures may be lurking just out of sight. Even without climbing the tower, he knew his chances of anyone spotting his flare were slim. They were in the middle of literally hundreds of acres of wilderness, and short of a low-flying plane just happening by, they were going to have to find another way of being rescued. He crouched down by the base of the tower and strained his ears, the shotgun cocked and ready, listening for any sign of an approaching threat. All he could make out, aside from his own heartbeat, was the wind through the leaves and the murmuring of the others in the cabin beneath him. For a moment, he almost convinced himself that the wolf monster had chosen to spare them and disappear back so deep into the vast expanse of swamp and forest that no one would ever encounter them again. That didn't make sense, though. A dog didn't just abandon a raccoon in a tree after tracking it for miles, especially when it already had the taste of blood in its mouth. But then, why was everything so quiet? Dixon thought about what he would do if he'd hunted down and cornered a wounded fugitive. If he knew the man was armed and dangerous, he wouldn't make a noise and give away his position. He would sit quietly and wait for the man to calm down and feel safe, because that was the best time to strike, when his prey was no longer desperate and terrified enough to fight, but rather shaken and confused enough to make a mistake. That's when Dixon became aware of it, the feeling that most everyone has, but that cops notice exceptionally well. The sensation of eyes upon you. That's when he knew the fight was far from over. Not only were the wolf creatures close, they were probably right on top of them.
Fuck it.
Dixon stood up and fired the flare gun into the air, and a burst of red fire shot towards the dark sky for a moment, before arcing out into the distance and slowly descending towards the earth, bathing the small clearing in a blood-red glow, like emergency lights in a doomsday bunker. Scattered throughout the clearing, all facing the cabin, were at least 15 wolves, all standing upon their hind legs, their eyes burning bright, reflected against the falling red comet, each looking directly into Dixon's soul, and their bodies quivered with apprehension and rage as they stood motionless, as if waiting for the signal to attack. Dixon felt his insides go cold, and it seemed as though the enraged eyes upon him were paralyzing him to the spot, preventing him from escaping. He exhaled a soft, croaking whisper.
Well, shit.
Murray leapt to her feet as Dixon came hurtling down the ladder from the roof hatch, momentarily forgetting she was still cuffed to the iron stove, and her back buckled painfully as a shackled wrist prevented her from standing upright.
What is it? What happened?
As soon as the words left her mouth, there came a deafening roar from outside the cabin that seemed to assault them from all sides. Jason Ford wailed and fell off the couch, directly on top of Holly. Janine screamed and collapsed to her knees, her hands clamped over her ears in a futile attempt to silence the onslaught of howling.
They're coming. Henry, you take the kitchen window. The mime and the hick take the smaller window. I'll take the one up front. Shoot smart, people. Target their heads and eyes. Don't fire unless you're sure you'll hit something.
The words were barely out of his mouth when there came a tremendous crash against the front of the house, which sent books flying off the desk and dust cascading down from the rafters above. The thundering sound of heavy feet tearing around the cabin shook the foundation, and the rough, jagged scraping of claws against the outer walls made Murray's blood turn to ice water. She felt like a mouse in a shoebox that had just been dropped into a snake pit.
God damn it, someone unlock me and give me a gun! Give me a gun!
Murray's words went unanswered as Dixon and Keller positioned themselves alongside the front windows of the cabin, weapons up and at the ready. The front door cracked down the center as something with a tremendous bulk slammed itself against it, causing a shockwave that nearly made Murray lose her balance. The front window exploded inward, showering Dixon, Jason, and Holly with glass as a massive wall of fur and teeth tried to claw its way inside. Dixon spun forward from against the wall and fired Jinx at point-blank range out the window and directly into the monster's face. The roar of pain was so loud, Murray felt her teeth vibrate within her jaw, and she instinctively closed her eyes and braced for impact, as if she was about to get hit by a tidal wave. Janine was screaming and clinging to Murray's leg, while Jason Ford cowered as best he could on the far side of the couch. Keller leapt back from the wall as a clawed hand, the size of a frying pan, crashed through the kitchen window. He wrenched a kitchen knife from the block on the counter and stabbed furiously at the hand and arm multiple times until it was withdrawn. He fired the shotgun out the window after it. Above Murray's head, the small window shattered, and glass poured down upon her and Janine like razor-sharp hail. Murray tugged at her cuffs so hard, the metal cut her wrists, and blood trickled down her fingers like rain off a rooftop. Dixon and Keller had their backs turned, firing out of their respective windows, and didn't see the massive wolf snout protruding into the cabin within spitting distance of Murray's head.
Jason, help!
Murray called across the room in desperation, but the young man either didn't hear her or chose not to acknowledge it, as he pressed his face down into the carpet with his hands over his head protectively. Murray tried to raise her leg to kick out at the creature as it closed its giant hand around the window, but the angle was too high for her to manage. She was just about to kick Janine off her and tell her to run for the back room when a shot rang out from just over her head and the monster's nose exploded, painting the walls with blood and meat. The creature let out an agonized wail and vanished back into the shadows beyond the window. Murray looked up to see Holly standing over them, her feet planted and both hands holding her small gun, the end of the barrel emitting the faintest traces of smoke. Janine leapt up and hugged her friend so hard that Murray was terrified Holly would unintentionally squeeze the trigger again.
Janine, grab the bolt cutters! Over there by the...
There came two enormous crashes of wood and brick as two of the wolf creatures slammed themselves into the front of the cabin. The walls cracked and buckled inward, and Keller and Dixon were thrown backward. Dust rained down so hard from the ceiling above, Murray's breath caught in her throat and choked her. The sound of pounding feet came above them from the roof, and the howling and roaring from outside grew so deafening, it felt as though her head was being bludgeoned by organ pipes. Dixon and Keller both fired their shotguns again towards the sounds of pounding feet. There came 2 roars of pain and fury, seconds before another crash struck the front of the cabin. Though this time the hit wasn't nearly as hard. From Keller's window came a bellow of rage, and a massive claw reached in and swiped at Keller.
Ah, fuck!
Murray saw his shirt tear, and blood splattered the walls as he dropped his shotgun. Keller spun away from the window, clutching his arm in pain as he cursed in anger. Gritting his teeth, he spun back around and fired his sidearm 4 times out the window at the creature as it made its way to break in.
Fuck you, you candy-ass wolf bastard!
I need more shells.
Dixon shouted over his shoulder in Jason's direction as he ejected 2 spent chambers from Jinx's barrel. Murray spotted her tactical vest on the table that Dixon had relieved her of after he knocked her unconscious.
Janine, in my vest. There's more ammo.
For a moment, Janine froze in pure terror, likely at the thought of crossing those few short steps across the room, closer to the creatures and the buckling wall. But as Dixon stood and held his hand outstretched behind him, waiting for more ammo that Jason wasn't going to deliver, she dashed forward and grabbed the vest, frantically digging into the pockets and handing the spare shells off to Dixon, who loaded them into the shotgun in rapid succession. Murray spun around, her sweaty hair slapping her brow as the sound of something slamming into the back wall shook the bunk bed. From above her, she heard the roof beams creak as something walked directly above her. They were literally attacking the cabin from all sides, testing for weak spots, trying to discover a spot where the gunfire wouldn't find them. Murray kicked out at Holly to get her attention.
Holly, aim directly upwards and fire. Now!
The young woman didn't hesitate, but raised the snub nose above her head with both hands and fired 3 shots into the wooden ceiling. Murray wasn't even sure if the gun had the power to punch through the roof, but the creature above them reacted with an angry snarl, as if it had been stung by wasps, and leapt to the ground. Keller picked up the fallen shotgun, and he and Dixon took turns firing in quick succession out the windows, trying to hold the wolves at bay.
To your left. On my mark. Now!
Keller fired a deafening round in the direction Dixon instructed, and a wolf creature stumbled and fell before it threw its weight into the cabin.
You're 2 o'clock! 1 coming! Aim high!
Dixon emptied both of Jinx's barrels, and the sound of buckshot striking flesh rang out like a cleaver against meat. Keller hollered in satisfied excitement.
You caught it in the side of the face! Blew its ear right off.
As Dixon and Keller continued to hold off the attack from the front of the cabin, Murray continued to hear clawing and slamming at the back of the cabin. They were spread too thin to effectively defend their crumbling fortress from all sides. They needed a distraction.
Janine, you have to get the bolt cutters and break the cuffs. If I can get to the roof and climb the tower, I can draw them up and away.
Janine had turned to look back at Murray, but it was clear by the look of confusion on her face that the gunfire and roaring of monsters outside was preventing her from hearing her words. Murray frantically pointed towards the heavy tool across the room with her foot.
The bolt cutters, Janine! I have to get to the roof!
Suddenly, Murray locked eyes with Holly, and with a horrific sinking feeling in her stomach, Murray recognized the look of clarity and resolve in the girl's eyes. Holly may not have been able to hear anything, but she clearly understood the words as she saw them roll off Murray's lips. The young girl darted towards the ladder.
No. No, Holly, don't! Get back here!
Murray hurled the full weight of her body against the cuffs, so hard the metal bit deep into the soft flesh of her wrists, and the cast-iron stove rattled against her thrashing. Before Murray could call to anyone to stop her, Holly had shot up the ladder and disappeared up into the darkness. Janine sprinted to the bottom of the ladder and screamed for her friend to come back. Murray's head spun. It couldn't be happening again. She had failed to stop her brother from dashing off into the forest, never to return. And like a terrifying living echo, the exact same scenario had just repeated itself. She refused to lose someone else. Not like this.
Jason, you useless sack of shit! Toss me your gun!
For the first time since the howling had started, Jason raised his head and looked at Murray. In that moment, he seemed to realize he had more to fear from her than anything that was outside attacking the cabin, and tossed the gun across the carpet in her direction. Murray flung herself forward and grabbed the cold, sweat-coated metal between her teeth, snatching it from the carpet like a shark would catch a seal. She dropped the weapon into her bloody hands and awkwardly tried to aim it at the chain binding her wrists together. But the angle was too extreme. She couldn't turn her wrist enough to put the metal links in her crosshairs. Suddenly, another creature shot both its clawed hands through the window over Murray's head. With an ear-splitting crack of wood and plaster, the creature tore out a chunk of wall on either side of the window, fracturing the wall on either side about the length of a surfboard. Murray inhaled the foul odor of sweat, blood, and putrid meat, and saw a wolf with a head the size of a horse's lean in and lock eyes with her, fangs bared, blood staining its teeth. Murray tilted herself sideways and backwards as far as the cuffs would let her, her right leg up against the wall and both her hands around the gun, as she fired 4 shots upwards directly into the mutant canine's face. Teeth shattered and cascaded down upon the ground like porcelain shards, as the wolf creature roared and sprayed Murray with a bloody saliva.
Burn in hell!
Murray fired the 2 remaining shots upwards through the roof of the creature's mouth as it howled and ducked back out of sight through the window, leaving long streaks of blood coating the broken sill in its wake. Murray wiped the blood and phlegm off her brow with the back of her hand and spat the foul taste out of her mouth down amongst the broken teeth littering the carpet.
Yeah, you'd better run.
Holly nimbly tiptoed across the roof and grabbed hold of the cold metal handrail of the winding wooden staircase, leading upwards to the platform above. She could sense the vibrations beneath her of the wolf mutants slamming into the cabin, but she had a good feeling that if she could scale the tower high enough, she could probably draw a few of them up after her. If the bullets left in her handgun couldn't kill them, she figured the fall from the tower just might. She doubted any of the great heavy brutes could match her speed and agility in regards to actually climbing the tower, but even if they could, she preferred the thought of dying up there, drawing the things away from Janine and the others, to dying down below, like a rabbit in a trap. She quickly, but carefully, darted up the first set of stairs, awkwardly trying to reload the cylinder of the gun by touch alone, as she watched the steps in front of her, trying to be mindful of any broken or missing ones. She felt a great shuddering vibration behind her, and turned quickly to see the silhouettes of 2 of the creatures upon the roof, looking her way. She immediately picked up her pace, but instead of following the route of the stairs that would double back on itself and put her directly over the wolves, she climbed out onto the frame of the tower and began climbing vertically up the structure, keeping the bulk of the tower between her and the creatures. She could feel the vibrations in the wood of the tower as they chased her. The stairway was too narrow for them to just walk up the way a normal person would, so she guessed they were climbing vertically up the side of the tower as she was. She was much lighter and had the climbing experience, but they had longer arms and legs and could cover more distance with each stride. She could suddenly smell them very clearly, a mixture of wet dog and coppery blood, invading her senses and setting the beginnings of panic deep down within her. She felt the tower shudder and risked a quick look down. They were right behind her, closing the distance with a speed she hadn't anticipated. Holly threw caution to the wind and started climbing like the cabin was on fire beneath her, and the flames were reaching upwards to scald her flesh. She no longer delicately tested the strength of each wooden beam before setting a weight upon it. If it was going to give, she would fall and very likely die. But if she took the extra time to be cautious, she would definitely be torn to pieces by merciless, jagged fangs, in less time than it would take for her to hit the ground. She was willing to risk those odds. She clenched her teeth and made herself climb faster. From somewhere beneath her, she felt the reverberation of a wooden beam giving way, and a brief pause before the tremor of something huge striking the roof shook the tower. She didn't look down. If she was lucky, one less was pursuing her, but if she was unlucky, several more had taken its place. When she reached the outside of the platform, she climbed up onto the guardrail and leapt upwards into the air and grabbed at the roof with shaking hands. Hanging freely by her fingertips, she desperately tried to kick her legs upwards to give herself enough momentum to climb atop the tower's roof. From beneath her came a sudden, violent shove that propelled her with so much force onto the roof that she was slammed upon her stomach fully upon the tower's crest and slid forward a painful few inches, causing her glasses to fly off. One of the creatures had climbed up after her so haphazardly fast it had crashed upwards right into her and inadvertently helped her reach the top safely. Holly rolled onto her back as she felt the enormous bulk of the monster clawing at the roof behind her, its upper body resting upon the edge, while its legs and lower body hung free in mid-air. Holly raised the small revolver and cocked back the hammer, aiming between her legs at the creature's wide-open mouth as it tore at the shingles, desperately trying to pull itself upwards. Without her glasses, Holly could barely see anything more than the dark silhouette of a blur just beyond the reach of her toes. But she felt, rather than heard when it roared, because of the sudden rush of warm, rancid air that blew past her face and threatened to choke her. She fired a desperate blind shot, and the bullet disappeared down the creature's wide, open mouth. Had Holly been able to hear anything, she would have made out the gagging, choked howl the creature made as it lost its grip and plummeted down to the earth below, where it ricocheted off several neighboring trees, tearing branches in its wake as it hit the ground with a bone-shattering thud. Holly rolled over onto her stomach and groped around the roof wildly for her glasses. It wasn't until her hands closed around the delicate frames and had replaced them upon her face that she felt the heavy footfalls vibrating towards her across the roof. There was another one up there with her. In the cabin below, Janine was still screaming in vain up the ladder after Holly, as if she'd forgotten the girl couldn't hear her cries. Murray hurled the empty gun at her to get her attention.
Janine, listen to me. She'll be back, but you have to get me out of here. Get the bolt cutters.
Janine's eyes found for the first time in the corner and ran towards it, scooping it up directly behind Keller and darting back across the room to where Murray was still chained against the stove. Murray extended her bloodied wrist out as far as she could reach.
Thank you. Holy shit, thank you. Just cut them apart.
Janine struggled to separate the arms of the cutters as she lifted the end up to Murray's cuffed hands.
I can't open them. They feel jammed.
Are they locked? Hurry, Janine.
Say, what the fuck are you doing?
Murray glanced over to see Jason Ford looking at them as he shakily tried to sit up. In the very next heartbeat, Murray glanced over at Dixon, who turned just in time to meet her eye.
What the fuck?
And charged at the women with a hatred in his eyes more intense than the veracity Murray had seen in the wolf creatures.
Look out!
Dixon grabbed the bolt cutters from Janine's hands and shoved her violently to the ground. Murray kicked her leg out and caught Dixon directly in the gut, causing him to shamble backwards. In a blind fury, he raised the heavy tool over his head, as if to strike her, when an enormous, crunching sound struck the roof and shook the cabin so hard, all the cabinets in the kitchenette flew open, and Keller and Dixon both fell to their knees.
Oh my god, Holly!
Murray barely had time to process the impact of whatever had struck the roof when the door shattered inward. Upending the desk, and one of the wolf creatures launched itself forward, blood streaking its dark fur from multiple open wounds. Keller rolled over sideways from the ground and fired the shotgun directly into the creature's side. It howled in rage as the blast tore open a hole in its right side, and it bore down on Dixon with fangs snapping together with the sound of knives against metal. Dixon swung the bolt cutters upwards and connected with the creature's snout, producing a loud crack of snapping bone. Janine grabbed Jinx from where Dixon had dropped it on the ground and fired another shot directly into the creature's back. And the kickback from the gun sent her stumbling backwards into the wall. As the creature thrashed across the ground, Dixon delivered 2 more blows with the bolt cutters onto its head. The wolf creature stood, took a disoriented swipe at Dixon, and retreated back out the way it had come. Keller ran to the door and fired another shot after it. From outside, the group heard the sound of several tree branches snapping, and the heavy thud of something huge hitting the ground. Keller took a quick look outside.
Holy shit! One of those things just fell from the tower.
From somewhere high above them came a scream of terror.
Holly!
Throw me the rifle!
Dixon tossed Keller the hunting rifle from across the room, and the young man darted out through the broken door and outside into the darkness. Bloodstains covered the leaves and dirt all around the clearing as Keller sprinted to the edge of the woods and raised the scope to put the top of the tower in his sights. He could make out the outlines of 2 figures above, one much larger than the other. 2 small pops rang out as Holly fired her snub nose at the creature to no avail. Keller targeted the larger creature and fired, the shot echoing across the forest like ripples in a pond. Holly fired her remaining bullets at the creature bearing down on her. She had nowhere to run, and there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell she could overpower this thing. In some crazy animalistic way, she planted her feet and grit her teeth, as if to show she wasn't going to back down. When, suddenly, the creature's head jerked and thick blood cascaded upwards. Holly saw part of its tongue fly across the roof, showering red droplets like a wet sponge. Even though she couldn't hear it, she felt the creature bellow as several droplets of rancid-smelling moisture pelted her like rain, covering her glasses in filth. The enraged wolf monster charged her, and Holly turned and let herself fall from the roof, the enormous beast leaping after her. Keller watched as the great hulking brute descended from the tower and landed hard upon the dirt with a sickening crunch. Keeping the rifle up and ready, he took a few cautious steps towards it and fired another shot directly into its mutilated head.
Henry, watch out!
Keller ducked as two more shotgun blasts exploded from several feet away from him, and a second wolf creature fell to the ground behind him and started to thrash in pain. Dixon calmly walked over to the writhing mass of muscle and fur, and ejecting the two spent shells from the sawn-off shotgun, he inserted two more and snapped the barrel closed. He fired the two remaining rounds into the snarling face of the beast, and in the few precious seconds after the echo of the shots faded into nothing, there was only the deafening sound of silence in the clearing around them. Janine came running out of the cabin.
Where's Holly?
The three of them glanced upwards to see the young woman dangling off the roof of the tower with her bare hands. Swinging her body back and forth, she tossed herself forward onto the platform to safety. Turning around, she waved down at them from above. Janine gasped as she fell to her knees and waved back.
Oh, thank God, we made it! We're alive!
Dixon snarled.
Shut your fucking mouth. We're even worse off now than we were before. Those things are only getting started.
The dawn was just starting to peek in through the broken window over Murray's head when she awoke from her short doze upon the glass-speckled floor. Holly had bandaged her cut wrists as best she could, and tended to Keller's slashed arm as well, before curling up on the couch to sleep next to Janine. Jason Ford was passed out and muttering under his breath as he dozed underneath the kitchen table, his good leg twitching while his bad, discolored leg continued to bleed like a fetid, leaky pipe. Murray glanced toward the front of the cabin and saw Keller sitting on the front steps with his back facing her.
Hey, Hemsworth Light. I need to piss.
Keller turned around to face her, his arm wrapped in a makeshift sling made from his own belt.
Come on, man, please. Once Dixon comes back, he'll refuse to let it happen.
Keller reluctantly stood up and slowly crossed the room, wincing as he reached his good arm over to his opposite side to retrieve the handcuff keys. Before he uncuffed her, he knelt down and looked her in the eye.
This isn't a command. It's a request. Please don't try anything.
Rats. I was totally hoping you and me later, a dark hotel room with a waterbed.
Keller rolled his eyes. He uncuffed one of Murray's wrists and unthreaded the links from around the pipe, reattaching the open cuff to her wrist again in front of her. Murray shakily tried to stand. She'd been in a crouched position so long, her legs felt numb. Keller took her by the arm and helped her cross the few short steps to the bathroom.
I'm flattered, but I'd rather spend my time with somebody less likely to assault a cop.
Your loss.
The bathroom was barely large enough for Murray to stand in on her own. A disgusting, cream-coloured toilet sat directly across from an ancient, dusty sink. A heavily cracked mirror, likely damaged during the assault on the cabin, hung over the rusty faucet. Glancing at her reflection, she was appalled to see several smears of caked, dried blood staining her face. Her eyes were bloodshot, and the bandage from where her head had struck the truck was grimy and peeling away. She looked like a homeless drug addict who had just spent the night in a dumpster full of raw meat. She smelled like it too.
I can take it from here, officer. Thanks.
She awkwardly tried to undo her belt, but her fingers and hands were sore and swollen from the cuffs. She felt like she was trying to open a pickle jar wearing oven mitts, and was irritated by the fact she probably looked like an idiot to Keller, who still hadn't backed off.
Here. Don't hit me, okay?
Keller shrugged his arm out of the makeshift sling, and gently turned her by the waist to face him. He carefully undid her belt buckle and unfastened the button of her jeans, his fingers grazing the flesh of her lower stomach. He straightened up awkwardly, and, for a moment, the two stood face to face, uncomfortably close. Murray convinced she hadn't been able to hide the warm smirk of pleasure in time. She sheepishly averted her eyes.
Thanks, Keller.
Call me Henry.
He nodded with a slightly embarrassed half-smile, and backed out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Murray undid her zipper and lowered her pants to her knees, before taking a seat on the cold porcelain ring. She shook her head and pressed her swollen hands to her eyes. She whispered to herself in the semi-darkness of the small room.
Real smooth, Murray. Possibly the last chance for that in your life. Poof. Gone.
After she'd finished with the toilet, she straightened up and cleaned her hands and face as best she could at the sink. The water trickled off her face in murky brown rivulets as she scrubbed the blood and dirt away and tried to pretend the cuffs weren't bothering her. As she turned off the water, she stared at her uneven reflection in the broken mirror. She allowed herself a small smile and let a single word roll off her tongue, as if to get a sense of how it tasted on her lips.
Henry.
She was about to turn and leave the bathroom when she heard the faint sound of shuffling coming from beneath her. She glanced down at her feet and paused, waiting to see if the sound would repeat itself. For another few moments, there was only harsh silence, until it came again. From beneath the floorboards came the unmistakable creaking of wood. Murray didn't move an inch, and didn't readjust her weight to make sure the sound wasn't of her own making. The sound came again, a careful, scuttling sound, as if something was maneuvering itself under the floor just beneath her. It wasn't a small thing either. It sounded to Murray like the type of noise her dog, Karma, would make when she was readjusting herself under the bed. The shuffling seemed to dissipate, as if it were moving further away. Murray turned herself around in the small bathroom to try to get a sense as to which direction the noise was heading, when there came a knock on the door.
You alright in there?
Murray opened the door and glanced out at Keller, his arm back in the makeshift sling, and looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Janine was sitting up on the couch with a still unconscious Holly draped over her lap, and Jason Ford was leaning against the kitchen counter, cupping water in his hands from the sink and slurping it loudly. There was still no sign of Dixon.
Did you guys just hear that?
Keller and Janine looked at her in mild confusion.
Hear what?
From the floor. It sounded like, I don't know, something moving around.
Keller shrugged.
Probably an animal of some kind. A raccoon or a possum, maybe?
Murray was about to protest when the more obvious urgency of their situation kicked in, and she cast the matter aside.
Where's Dixon anyway?
He took your shotgun and rifle and went to check the perimeter to scout out the path. He should be back soon.
Murray raised her handcuffed wrists up under Keller's nose.
Henry, please, you have to let me out of these. Dixon's a psychopath. You have to see that. He's got a personal vendetta against me and will let you all die before letting me free to help.
Keller slowly placed his hand on Murray's bound wrists and lowered them.
Listen, I'm not blind to the way he's been treating you, okay? It's inexcusable, and trust me. Once we're all out of this, he's gonna answer for it. But I'm an officer of the law, and you're wanted for numerous felonies.
Oh my God, Keller, wake the fuck up!
Murray screamed so loud, Janine flinched, and Jason Ford jumped.
I'm not trying to escape. I'm trying to help keep us all alive. This isn't the end of the fucking Point Break. It's a life or death situation. Do you honestly think you're better off with him holding the gun? The guy who fucking beat me with my hands were tied while you stood by and did nothing?
Murray felt the beginnings of furious and desperate tears start to form in her eyes. She was tired of being cuffed and helpless, unable to protect the girls or herself. This likely was going to be her last chance for freedom before Dixon came back. But she was sure, if he was still calling the shots by the time the sun went down, they'd all be dead before daybreak. Keller looked conflicted and ashamed as he rubbed his eyes and made himself look back at her.
I'm sorry I didn't do more to stop him. I'm sorry for how he treated you.
He slowly reached out and tried to put his hand on her shoulder, but Murray angrily shrugged him off.
You're killing us all, you know that? If the wolves don't kill us, he will. What did he tell you happened to Barclay? That he fell? Bullshit! He shot him, Henry!
Keller's face went from upset to stern. Janine raised herself from the couch and walked over to stand beside them.
He shot him in cold blood and threw him overboard for those things to have him. You know he did, Keller. It's who he is.
You saw this? You saw him shoot Cal and toss him over?
Murray grit her teeth in frustration.
Honestly, no. My fucking head was turned, but you know what? I know who did see it.
As one, all three of them turned to look at Jason, who seemed to shrivel up under their harsh gaze.
Oh, now wait a sec. Come on, guys.
Keller took 2 steps towards the kitchenette, his good hand on the butt of his holstered sidearm.
You were the only person in the back of the truck, Jason. What happened to Barclay? Tell me the truth, Jason. Did Nate shoot him?
Jason sank into one of the kitchen chairs and glanced back and forth from Keller to Murray to Janine.
I'm not sure what I saw, man. It all happened so fast.
Don't bullshit me, Jason.
Keller's voice was angry, his gaze piercing Jason's trembling form like knives as he tried to cower away.
He saved our lives, man. We'd all be dead otherwise.
Keller snarled and ran his hand through his hair in fury. Janine hurled an empty shotgun shell at Jason and started screaming at him.
You fucking coward! You've been nothing but a fucking waste of life since we found you. You're the reason those things came after us. You're the reason Murray's brother is dead. And you're the one who had to open your fucking mouth when I was trying to help Murray. Holly's been trying to save your life this whole time. We should have left you to fucking die.
There was a moment of bitter silence as Jason sat there, eyes wide and mouth opening and shutting stupidly, unable to say anything either to defend himself or apologize. From the front steps came the sound of heavy footsteps, and suddenly Dixon was in the room, the hunting rifle clasped in one hand, his eyes deadly furious.
What in the greasy fuck is going on here? Why isn't Kaplan chained to the stove?
Keller drew his sidearm from his holster and pointed it directly at Dixon's head.
The fuck you think you're doing, Henry?
His voice was cold and quiet, with perhaps a hint of confusion, but no sign of fear.
Shut up and drop the rifle, Nate.
Keller's voice was firm and unwavering, and his arm didn't shake as he pointed the gun between Dixon's eyes, his finger resting on the trigger. Dixon calmly bent down and placed the hunting rifle on the floor, before straightening up and raising his hands in the air.
I don't know what she's been telling you, boy, but you better think long and hard about this course of action you're pursuing.
Did you kill Calvin, Nate?
Dixon glared hard at Murray, Keller, and Janine.
Listen, you idiot. We don't have time for this. This place is a wreck. We can't defend it another night, and we barely have enough ammo to kill a goose. Those walls we fought last night, they were just the scouts, the ones we wounded during the truck chase. You think they were tough? They were fighting hurt. We're gonna have the entire rest of the pack at full strength after us tonight. Probably dozens of them, pissed off and out for revenge.
Keller fired a shot past Dixon's ear, and they all jumped. Dixon fell to one knee, his hand over his right ear, and let out an enraged snarl as he slowly stood back up.
You fucking cocksucking sack of shit!
You killed him and left him behind, Nate. He was my friend. He was both of our friends.
I saved your lives, you limp dick retard. There was no way we were going to escape. I made a hard choice, but I'd make the same one again. One of us had to die so the rest of us could survive.
That is such bullshit! You weren't thinking of us. You were only thinking of saving yourself. You would have killed any of us to save your skin, and you'd do it again.
You're thinking of turning on me? You want to survive the night? You need me.
That's where you're wrong, Nate. We're not thinking anything. We've already decided. I think the cuffs would look much better on you than her. And you can stay here tonight, alone, and make the same noble sacrifice Calvin and Travis did to save our lives.
Hell fucking yes.
About fucking time.
Hey, hold up now. What about me?
Sure, Jason. You're welcome to come, if you can keep up.
Oh, come on, man. That's not fair. You can't leave me like this.
Without taking his eyes off Dixon, Keller held up his key for Janine to take.
Uncuff her, Janine. Then wake up Holly. We're getting out of here.
Don't you fucking dare!
Dixon barked at Janine as she took the key from Keller and started walking toward Murray. She flipped him off.
Kiss my ass, you one-eyed freak.
In the silence that followed Janine's words, there was a sudden whisper of sound from beneath the floorboards. It was as if something rough had just scraped itself against the underside of the wood. They all heard it and froze. The unspoken question on all of their lips, hanging in the air around them like a fog. The noise came again. A scraping and shuffling sound from under the floor directly between Dixon and Keller. There was a creak of wood and a soft hiss of something shuffling beneath them. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. For another 3 seconds, there was nothing but confused silence and alarm.
What the fuck?
There was an explosion of floorboards as 2 long, pale, sickly thin arms shot upward from beneath Keller and grabbed both of his legs, dragging him down onto the floor after it. Keller screamed uncontrollably in agony as his legs broke and he was pulled into the narrow space at an odd angle, like a rag doll through an air duct. Dixon flew forward and grabbed at Keller, but the man was already wedged in the floor up to his chest, his arms and broad shoulders pinning him in place, preventing him from being pulled down any further. Still, the unseen force beneath him tugged at him from below, determined to have him. Murray heard several loud snaps as Keller's ribs broke, and his screams intensified as the bones shattered in his arms and broke through his skin like jagged pearl white spears. Over the sounds of Keller's dying screams, Murray screamed at Janine.
Quick, Janine, the keys!
Murray saw Keller vanish beneath the blood-stained, broken floorboards, Dixon on his stomach with an arm still outstretched trying to grab at him. The echo of the man's screams reverberated from somewhere under the house as he was dragged away, broken and bleeding. Janine frantically grabbed at Murray's wrist and forced the small key into the lock, trying to focus on the handcuffs and ignore the blood-curdling screams as they started to fade beneath them.
I've almost got it! I've almost got it!
A gunshot exploded from somewhere over to Murray's left, and she felt her hair flutter as the bullet whizzed by. For a moment she was convinced she had been shot, and froze for a second, waiting for the shock to wear off and the pain begin. But it never did. Janine suddenly let out a choking gasp. Murray looked up into Janine's wide-open, terrified eyes. The keys fell to the floor as Janine's hands flew upward to cover the hole in her throat. Murray screamed in horror as Janine collapsed forward, blood spurting from between her fingers, and tried her best to catch her with her cuffed hands. Janine and Murray hit the ground hard, Janine gasping huge, choking, gurgling breaths as blood ran from her mouth.
Oh my God. Oh my God, Janine, no! No, Janine! Breathe! Please!
Murray felt hot tears pour from her eyes as Janine stared upwards at the ceiling, likely unable to process what was happening due to the lack of oxygen. From across the room, Holly wailed and ran forward, tears staining her face as well, as she tore off her shirt and pressed it to her dying friend's wound. Murray looked over at Dixon, who was down on one knee by the hole in the floor, his eyes wild and fierce and unremorseful, with Keller's gun up and pointed at her, the end of the barrel smoking.
I told you. Your ass belongs to me, Kaplan.
Janine's choking breath slowly started to soften, and the color drained from her face. Murray grabbed Janine's blood-soaked hand from where it lay limply by her side and squeezed it.
Please, Janine. Hang on, please don't. Please.
Then, it was over. Her hand went cold, and her body seemed to shudder one final time before it relaxed. Holly wailed and shook her friend, and then buried her face in Janine's chest and sobbed deeply. From across the room, Murray heard Jason Ford muttering like a broken record.
Holy shit! Holy shit!
Murray shut her eyes tight and clenched her teeth. She felt a rage burning deep down within her, like she'd never experienced in her life. She let out a scream of furious anger and hurled herself at Dixon, no longer caring that he had a gun. Dixon must have anticipated her attack and was ready for it. He connected a punch directly into her temple and sent her sprawling over sideways and into the couch. Barely feeling the blow, Murray shot back up and threw herself at him again, but Dixon planted his fist low into her gut and knocked the wind out of her, causing her to fall to her knees. Dixon pressed the hot barrel of the gun directly into her forehead.
Go ahead. Do it! Kill me, you fucking coward! I swear to Christ, you better do it, because if I get free, I'm going to castrate you with a fucking spade!
Dixon chuckled and grabbed her lower jaw with his free hand.
I told you I wasn't gonna kill you, Kaplan. You and I still have so much to look forward to together.
Murray lurched forward and bit his hand as hard as she could. Dixon screamed and smashed the butt of the gun into her forehead, knocking her back and tearing a strip of flesh away from his palm.
God damn it!
Dixon clutched at his hand in agony and darted to the kitchen, knocking Jason aside as he ran it under the kitchen faucet. Murray spat the piece of wet flesh out across the floor.
I'm going to kill you slowly, Dixon. Then I'm going to fucking defibrillate your ass back to life just so I can kill you all over again.
Dixon emerged from the kitchen with his hand wrapped in a dishcloth and a long blade from the knife block.
You know what, Kaplan? We may as well start now. You took my eye. Now I'm gonna take yours.
Dixon stomped over towards her and planted his knee directly into her chest. Murray reached out with her cuffed hands and grabbed at the hand wielding the knife. But she couldn't hold back the full weight of his upper body as he forced the knife down and started dragging it across the flesh of her cheek towards her eye. Murray screamed through clenched teeth as the blade bit deep and travelled past her nose and up towards her left eye. Her hold on Dixon's wrist started to buckle when she felt the knife slice upwards by her tear duct, and she screamed in genuine pain. Suddenly, Dixon's body jolted back, and Murray was able to force the knife away as he collapsed to the floor. Holly stood over him, the taser she had given her in one hand and the keys to the handcuffs in the other. Holly threw herself down on top of Dixon and stabbed at him with the taser as if it were a blade, connecting with his chest and neck over and over again. Dixon's body spasmed upon the ground as Murray raised herself up and felt fresh blood flow freely down her cheek. She grabbed the keys from the ground where Holly had dropped them and quickly uncuffed herself. She stood up and kicked Dixon in the face 3 times until his nose broke. Then she picked up the knife and stood over him.
Where do I even start?
Suddenly, she heard the sound of a gun click behind her. She turned to see that Jason had crawled into the living room and now had Keller's gun pointed at her. He stammered as she looked down at him with fury in her eyes.
You can't kill him. We need him.
From somewhere in the distance among the trees came a long, deep howl. And again Murray spun around to get a look outside. The night was nearly gone, and the sun was starting to appear over the horizon. But the wolves were out and on the move. Dixon had been right. They were coming for them with a vengeance. She looked back over her shoulder at Jason.
You can keep him then. Come on, Holly.
No, wait!
Murray grabbed Holly's arm, and together the two of them sprinted out the door and across the clearing towards the woods. Murray was temporarily shocked to see the carcasses of at least 4 wolf creatures laying in heaps upon the ground around the cabin. But she didn't let herself get too distracted by them. Shoving Holly in front of her, they left the clearing and shot up the path.
We'll head back the way we came, past the truck and towards my camp. If we run, we'll get there in maybe an hour. I have more guns and a radio. We'll be all right.
It wasn't until the words were out of her mouth that she remembered Holly couldn't hear what she was saying anyway, and decided to save her breath. Her cheek was hurting her badly, and every hard footfall sent another jolt of pain up her cheek and allowed another trickle of blood to run down her face and into her mouth. Suddenly, Holly stumbled in the dark, and Murray stopped to help her up. From one side of the dirt road came a rustling in the leaves. Murray looked sideways to scan the direction the noise came from.
Karma? Is that you?
Suddenly, she spotted them. The glowing pale points of light staring at her from just a few feet off the forest floor. The same eyes she'd seen twice before, back at the RV and then again at their camp. Those soulless, taunting eyes.
Oh, fuck me.
The thing crawled into the faint light of the semi-dawn, and Holly screamed and clutched at Murray as they both backed away in terror. Murray had been wrong. This thing wasn't an 80-pound, shriveled, hairless animal. It was something far, far worse. As the creature crawled forward onto the dirt road, Murray could make out distinct features she hadn't been able to see before. It was humanoid, completely pale and hairless, but definitely closer to a human than an animal. His body was sickly thin, and its limbs seemed overly long. Its skin stretched taut over a sharp, jagged skeleton, and random folds of flesh strangely hanging free in all the wrong places. Its eyes were enormous and blank, reflective like headlights, but as lifeless as a frozen river. The head seemed crooked and tilted sideways at the wrong angle, with an overlarge mouth full of pointed fangs that clicked together harshly as it snapped its jaw in rapid succession, as if considering which of them to devour first. What was most terrifying about the creature was that, aside from the clicking of its jaw, it made absolutely no noise as it seemed to glide across the leaves and dirt, drifting towards them like a pale, monstrous shadow, putting one overlarge blood-stained hand in front of another as it continued to advance.
Get behind me.
Murray never broke eye contact with the creeper as she shoved Holly roughly behind her and pitifully raised her fists as if they would be any use against this thing. Even though it was crawling low to the ground, Murray could already easily tell it outweighed her in muscle and was longer than her by a solid foot. Her injured eye kept watering painfully and blurring part of her vision, and her hands were so swollen she could barely make fists with them. She put all of that out of her mind as she squared off against the thing that had dragged her into this in the first place. The thing she had volunteered to hunt. The thing that had, inadvertently, resulted in Travis's death and had mercilessly torn Keller to pieces. And now, it was all hers.
Oh, you picked the wrong fucking day, Creeper.
Suddenly, the creature hissed, raised its head and looked off to one side, before actually repositioning itself to face down the road the way Murray and Holly had come. For one ludicrous second, Murray dared to believe the thing was intimidated by her. But in the next moment it became painfully clear what had distracted it. With an ear-splitting roar and a thundering of pounding feet, one of the wolf creatures charged down the path at them with the force of a runaway train. When it was within 5 yards, it stopped abruptly and stood up on its hind legs, staring with fury at the creeper and snarling like a dog whose territory had been intruded upon. The creeper let out an alarmingly loud, deep hiss and raised itself up on its back legs. And when standing upright, Murray judged it to be at least 6 feet tall. The thing's head shot forward on its long, serpentine neck, and it brandished its clawed hands on either side of it, like eagle's talons. The wolf creature roared so loud, Murray's ears rang, and she fell over backwards on top of Holly, just as the creeper launched itself forward to attack. The wolf barreled forward to meet the attack and slammed into it with the force of a linebacker. But the creeper sank its claws into the massive creature's chest and neck and would not relinquish its grip, even as the bigger monster grappled with it. The wolf buried its claws into the creeper's skin and attempted to tear it away, but the creeper climbed sideways up the wolf's chest with startling agility and flipped itself backwards to land upon its back. The creeper tore at the wolf's flesh as the mutant canine in turn slammed itself backwards into the trees and undergrowth, trying to dislodge the pale menace. The wolf reared back and snapped its jaws over its shoulder with the force of a bear trap, trying to ensnare the creeper in its fangs, but the elusive creature always remained just out of reach. The two monsters tore at each other as they thrashed across the ground and nearly rolled right over Murray and Holly as they lay terrified upon the ground, clutching each other, not daring to move. Murray attempted to stand, but the fight was so fierce she was afraid of drawing any attention to herself. She could barely move Holly anyway, who appeared to be scared stiff. The wolf finally dislodged the creeper by slamming it backwards against a tree, and the sickly thin monster went spiraling through the air to land on all fours, several yards away. The wolf creature charged the smaller beast again, and snapped at it with its jaws, trying to break its neck. If it weren't for the speed of the pale creature, Murray was sure it would never have stood a chance. The wolf had to weigh twice as much in muscle mass, and was at least a good foot taller than it. But Murray could already detect a pattern in the way the creeper attacked. It didn't try to match the wolf blow for blow. Rather, it tried to evade it, to keep just out of arm's reach and then ensnare it, like a snake, as soon as it got the chance, and make sure it delivered equally as much damage to itself trying to dislodge it, as well as exhausting it at the same time. The wolf continued to swipe at the creature with its claws, but most blows missed the mark, as the pale creature dodged each blow like a champion boxer, and shot underneath the creature's spread legs. The wolf spun around and caught it with a lucky swipe that sent it flying through the brush to land hard upon a fallen tree. The wolf moved in for the kill, and, as if to smash it under its paws when the creeper reached out and grabbed both of the wolf's meaty fists in a death grip, using both of its over-large hands and feet to maintain its hold. With the wolf's hands and arms shackled in front of it by the creature, it attempted to bite at the creeper ferociously, but again, most blows missed their target, as the pale monster dodged the attack by hurling its weight back and forth, causing the wolf monster to lose balance and topple over sideways. That's when the creeper found its opportunity. In the split second it took the larger creature to take a breath after it hit the ground, the creeper grabbed hold of the wolf's mouth with its massive hands and held it shut, then buried the claws of its thumbs directly into the wolf's eyes. Murray heard the wet pops as both eyes were punctured, and the creeper released its hold and allowed itself to be thrown off as the wolf howled in confusion and pain, swiping randomly left and right with its claws as it tried, disoriented, to relocate its opponent. The wolf's head snapped in Murray and Holly's direction, as it either heard or smelled them, and made directly for them, every footstep producing a miniature earthquake. Murray tried to drag Holly backwards, but they both stumbled over their own feet and fell in a heap upon the forest floor. Right before the wolf creature was upon them, the creeper struck again. Climbing up the wolf's back, it grabbed its upper and lower jaw in either hand and began to tug at them. The wolf let out a howl of dismay and panic and slammed itself backwards against another tree, causing the creeper to lose its grip and resulting in the wolf's jaws snapping down upon its arm. An angry hiss escaped the creeper's teeth, and the pale monster desperately tried to force the mouth open again with its good hand and free its trapped arm. With a tearing of flesh, the smaller creature succeeded as a layer of skin was stripped from its forearm, and it forced the wolf's mouth open again. One hand just below the snout, the other just above the chin at the jawline. The creeper twisted its body and wrenched at the massive jaws with all its might, until there was a deafening crack and a wet crunching sound as it broke the wolf's jaw and fractured its head in half. The great bulk of the wolf came crashing down to land an arm's length away from Murray. The creeper was flung off and landed awkwardly on its bad arm. It hissed again and shuddered before disappearing into the undergrowth without making a sound, leaving a greasy blood trail in its wake. Murray lay shell-shocked for perhaps 15 seconds before she shakily stood upright, her eyes still glued to the dead wolf creature before her. For some reason she couldn't explain, she was gasping like she'd run an uphill marathon, and it occurred to her she likely had been holding her breath the entire fight.
Holly, come on. It's over. We have to move.
Murray turned, and her stomach sank. Dixon stood a dozen feet away, blood streaming from his nose, his arm around Holly's small neck, her shotgun, Jinx, pressed against the girl's cheek. He tossed the handcuffs at Murray's feet.
Put them on and kneel down, Kaplan, or else the mime gets it worse than the other one did.
Murray felt something snap inside her.
Fuck it, Dixon. I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm the one you want, just shoot me. Let her go and just fucking shoot me!
Murray took 2 steps forward and spread her arms wide. Dixon smirked.
All right then.
Dixon hurled Holly aside and aimed the gun's barrels directly at Murray. He fired a shot, and she caught the blast directly in the chest, causing her to fly backwards and hit the ground hard. Murray didn't remain conscious long enough to register the pain. All she could make out before she lost all perception was Holly's scream and the distant howling of a wolf.
There's always a reason to be afraid.